When we hear the word caveman, most people picture a shaggy-haired, club-wielding brute grunting in a dark stone cavern. But that crude stereotype couldn't be further from historical truth. The term caveman is a vague, outdated label used to describe early humans who lived tens of thousands of years ago, including Homo habilis, Homo erectus, Neanderthals, and early Homo sapiens. These were not dim-witted savages. They were intelligent, adaptive, and social beings. Archaeological evidence shows that Neanderthals, for example, had larger brain sizes than modern humans and cared for injured clan members, buried their dead, with symbolic objects, and even created early forms of art. Caves were just one of many forms of shelter used by these early people. In fact, most cavemen didn't live in caves at all. Caves were typically temporary dwellings used during harsh weather or for seasonal protection. Many lived in open-air shelters, constructed huts from branches, animal hides, and bones, or set up camp near water sources and game trails. These ancient humans were highly mobile, moving with the seasons to follow migrating animals and gathering opportunities. Calling them cavemen today is like calling modern people garage dwellers, because we sometimes sit in the garage. To truly understand their lives, we must move past the cartoon cliches and appreciate them as ingenious survivors of an unforgiving prehistoric world, laying the foundation for the modern human journey. Life in the Paleolithic era didn't have alarms, clocks, or calendars, but time still mattered. A typical day for early humans began at sunrise, dictated entirely by the natural world. As light filtered through the forest or cave entrance, the clan slowly awakened. Survival instincts kicked in immediately. They scanned the area for signs of danger. Predators like saber-toothed cats or rival groups competing for territory. One person might check the fire, another examine the condition of weapons, while elders or mothers comforted sleepy children. Without written language, planning was done through gestures, sounds, and shared understanding honed over years of living as a tightly bonded group. The early morning was a critical window for preparing the day's survival strategy. The group might gather to quietly discuss who would set out to hunt or forage, who would stay behind to care for the young, and which tools needed sharpening. Men and women both contributed to survival. Some hunted large prey, others foraged for edible roots, berries, and herbs. Fire, once discovered and mastered, became central to their lives. Keeping it alive overnight was a sacred duty, as reigniting it from scratch could take hours of work with flint and dry bark. These small routines, gathering water, bundling dried meat, carrying sharpened stones, weren't just chores. They were acts of resilience, keeping the group alive in a harsh, unpredictable environment. For early humans, every morning was a quiet battle against extinction, and they faced it with strength, unity, and the instinctive wisdom carved into them by generations before. Once the morning routines were complete, the real work of the day began. Life for early humans revolved around one primary objective: finding food. In the absence of farming or permanent storage, every meal had to be earned, day by day, task by task. This is what anthropologists call the hunter-gatherer lifestyle. AI, delicate balance between risk and reward, mobility and survival. Hunters, often men but not always, would form small cooperative groups and venture out into the wild in search of game. This could be anything from small animals like rabbits or birds to large and dangerous prey such as bison, mammoths, or wild boars. These hunts required stealth, patience, coordination, and an intimate understanding of animal behavior. They used wooden spears, stone-tipped javelins, and even coordinated ambushes using the terrain to their advantage. A successful hunt could feed the group for days, but failure meant hunger, fatigue, and risk of injury. Meanwhile, gatherers, often women and children, were no less important. They scoured the land for edible plants, berries, roots, nuts, insects, eggs, and herbs. This task demanded extensive knowledge of the environment, knowing which plants were nutritious, which were poisonous, and when certain fruits would ripen. They often traveled several miles a day, storing finds in woven baskets or animal skin pouches. Gathering also helped discover medicinal herbs used to treat wounds, infections, or fevers. Both tasks were equally vital. The group's survival depended not on brute force, but on cooperation, strategy, and adaptability. And though danger lurked in every shadow, whether from predators or natural hazards, these early people learned to read the land like a book, becoming some of the greatest survivors Earth has ever known. If food fueled their bodies, tools empowered their evolution. Toolmaking was one of the most critical and transformative activities of prehistoric life, separating early humans from other animals and paving the way for future civilizations. From sunrise to sunset, someone in the clan was almost always shaping, sharpening, or improving a tool, a spearhead from flint, a scraper from obsidian, or a hammerstone from river rock. The process required skill, precision, and practice. Early humans learned to create sharp edges by knapping, striking one rock against another to chip away flakes. These flakes were used to cut meat, scrape hides, or carve wood. Over time, tools became more specialized, awls to punch holes in, leather, needles made from bone, and even early harpoons and fishhooks. Animal sinew served as thread, bones became handles, fire hardened spear tips. It was a time of relentless experimentation, and every small breakthrough made life just a little more secure. Toolmaking wasn't just about utility, it was also how knowledge was passed down. Elders taught the younger generation, not through words, but by demonstration. Children watched closely as parents struck stones or bound spear shafts, mimicking the movements until they could craft their own. This hands-on tradition was how culture, creativity, and problem-solving were transmitted. More than mere survival gear, these tools were symbols of ingenuity. They enabled humans to carve shelters, skin animals, defend against predators, and ultimately shape their environment rather than be shaped by it. In the flickering firelight of the prehistoric world, the clinking sound of stone against stone was not just noise, it was the heartbeat of human progress. Though prehistoric life was physically demanding and dangerous, it wasn't devoid of warmth, emotion, or connection. In fact, early humans relied deeply on social bonds and family unity for survival. Life was lived in small, tightly knit groups, clans of 15 to 40 individuals, usually composed of extended families. These groups shared food, responsibilities, and protection, forming the foundation of early human society. Without written language or complex tools of communication, connection was forged through gesture, expression, touch, and presence. Every member had a role. No one was left behind. Older members were the guardians of wisdom, passing down stories, skills, and survival lessons. Younger adults were the providers and protectors, while children, though fragile in such a harsh world, were the hope of continuity. They learned by mimicking the adults, copying the way they struck stones or followed tracks, turning play into survival training. Social interaction wasn't just about efficiency. Humans even then needed companionship and emotional support. Around the fire, they shared meals, huddled for warmth, and possibly even shared simple songs or rhythmic sounds, using drums, clapping, or bone flutes. Grooming, comforting, and laughing were part of daily life. Archaeological discoveries show that they cared for their sick and elderly, even those who could no longer contribute physically, proof of empathy and emotional intelligence. Though their lives lacked material luxury, their bonds were arguably richer than many modern social structures. In a world of constant uncertainty, connection was their strength, and family was their only safety net. Far from being emotionless or mechanical survivors, early humans displayed a remarkable capacity for creativity, symbolism, and spirituality. One of the most profound pieces of evidence is found deep within caves across Europe and Africa, stunning cave paintings that still survive after tens of thousands of years. These weren't random scribbles. They were deliberate, meaningful expressions of thought. Using crushed minerals, charcoal, and animal fat as paint, they created images of animals, human figures, handprints, and mysterious symbols, often located in hidden chambers. These paintings suggest not just an appreciation for beauty, but perhaps ritual, storytelling, and belief systems. Why paint a herd of bison in a dark cave? Why trace the outline of a hand again and again? Many scholars believe these artworks were linked to spiritual practices or hunting magic, created to ensure success or communicate with unseen forces. They reflect an awareness of self, time, and mortality, an emotional depth that marks the dawn of culture. But art wasn't limited to caves. Evidence shows early humans crafted jewelry from bones, shells, and teeth, painted their bodies with ochre, and wore animal skins not only for warmth, but for identity or symbolism. Burial sites have been found with carefully arranged skeletons, grave goods, and red pigment, suggesting ritualistic treatment of the dead and belief in an afterlife. Firelight flickering on painted cave walls, combined with rhythm and symbolism, likely created deeply moving spiritual experiences. These moments weren't just decoration or distraction, they were expressions of awe, fear, hope, and connection to something greater. This was the dawn of the human soul, where survival met symbolism and existence became meaning. For early humans, danger wasn't an occasional threat, it was an everyday reality. Living in the untamed wild meant constant vigilance against predators like saber-toothed cats, cave bears, wolves, and massive birds of prey. A single misstep could be fatal, so the clan learned to rely on keen observation, defensive tools, and group cooperation. Children were taught early to distinguish the sounds of danger, to freeze when warned, and to never stray far from the group. They didn't build walls or fortresses. Their safety lay in mobility and awareness. Watchers were often posted when others slept or hunted, ready to alert the group with subtle signals. Fires were used not just for warmth or cooking, but also to ward off beasts during the night, their flames glowing like barriers between life and death. But it wasn't only animals that posed threats. Other human clans were often just as dangerous. Competition for resources, water, food, shelter, could lead to conflict or territorial disputes. Most interactions were likely cautious or neutral, but skirmishes happened, injuries from stone. Weapons and signs of violent deaths in some skeletons suggest moments of brutal confrontation. However, early humans also understood that cooperation was often more powerful than combat. Alliances, exchanges, or even intermarriages between tribes may have occurred to strengthen bonds and avoid unnecessary bloodshed. Then there was nature itself: storms, floods, wildfires, and freezing temperatures. Without modern shelter or knowledge of weather systems, these people were exposed and vulnerable. They learned to read the skies, track seasonal shifts, and move with the land. Their resilience wasn't just about fighting, it was about adapting, enduring, and learning from every near-death experience. In this world, survival was not about who was strongest. It was about who was most aware, most united, and most prepared. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the shadows grew long, early humans returned to their shelters, often weary from the physical demands of the day. But evening wasn't simply a time to sleep. It was a sacred gathering time, where connection deepened and the soul found its rhythm. In the flicker of the firelight, the harsh world softened. The tribe would circle around the flames, warming themselves, sharing food, and reflecting on the day's successes or failures. Food was cooked slowly over open fires, meat roasted on sticks, tubers wrapped in leaves and buried in hot coals, dried fruits passed from hand to hand. The smell of smoke and roasting flesh became the scent of safety and satisfaction. Here, the day's divisions, hunters, gatherers, caretakers, blended into one unified circle. Children leaned against parents. Elders spoke softly. Embers glowed like memories rising into the night sky. And then came the stories. With no written language, oral storytelling was the heart of their culture. Around the fire, tales were told not just for entertainment, but to teach lessons, preserve history, and inspire courage. Stories of great hunts, lost loved ones, or spiritual visions were passed from one generation to the next. They didn't have books. They had living memories, carried in voice and gesture. Laughter and song may have echoed, or perhaps quiet, chants to lull children to sleep. The fire was also a spiritual presence, something almost magical in a dark and uncertain world. It protected, comforted, and united them. When night came, they slept close together, using hides as blankets, with someone always nearby to tend the fire. They didn't have locks or alarms. What they had was trust, community, and instinct. In the darkness, as stars blinked overhead, They closed their eyes knowing they had survived another day, not just through strength, but through love, wisdom, and unity. The world of the cavemen was never static. It was a time of constant change, quiet revolution, and extraordinary transformation. Over tens of thousands of years, early humans didn't just survive. They adapted, innovated, and slowly laid the groundwork for the rise of civilization itself. What began as simple foraging and hunting evolved into more sophisticated forms of living, forming the bridge between the Stone Age and the dawn of history. As human knowledge accumulated, people began to experiment with nature. Some clans noticed that seeds grew where food had been dropped. This observation led to the first steps toward agriculture, the planting and harvesting of crops. With this shift came profound change. Instead of following herds and wandering the land, humans started to settle in one place. They began building permanent homes from mud, stone, and wood, gradually forming the first villages. The domestication of animals followed. Dogs, sheep, goats, and cattle became companions, protectors, and sources of food and labor. Fire, once a mystery to be kept alive, became a tool mastered at will. Tools grew more refined. The hand axe gave way to the plow, the spear to the sickle. Societies began to store food, make pottery, create clothing from woven fabrics, and even carve symbols that would eventually become written language. But it wasn't just the physical world that changed. The human mind expanded too. People developed spiritual systems, gods to explain the mysteries of life and death, and rituals that united communities. Music, art, and storytelling grew more complex. The clan evolved into a tribe, the tribe into a village, the village into a city-state, and yet at the core, much remained the same. The essence of daily life, the need to eat, love, protect, create, and connect, endured. The people we call cavemen were not crude primitives. They were the first dreamers, the first architects of survival, the original authors of the human story. Without them, there would be no pyramids, no cities, no science or art. Their legacy lives not just in fossils and flint, but in every heartbeat that strives, adapts, and imagines. They did not know they were making history. They were simply living. And that, perhaps, is the most human thing of all.